I would just like to have one or two people from each breakout room kind of summarize what you talked about, and it can be the person in charge of the breakout room or somebody else, if somebody else is willing to jump in. So let's start with Jack.
I was going to ask David if, so can we bring our whiteboards to the foreground, David?
Yeah, you can share your screen just like you would a PowerPoint.
And then just click on that.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can manage that. Yeah, there it is.
All right.
So in theory, everybody's seeing this now?
Everybody can see it.
I would love to pick on someone else to talk about it, but I suspect I won't have much luck. So, but I'd be happy to be interrupted and corrected on that, or someone else might add something. I gave a short presentation about conservation efforts. I talked about two that I've personally been involved in, carefully explaining that I'm not a conservation expert like Claire is, but I have had some experience, and really it's not, it isn't about the technology and your experience with it. It's more about the issues that conservation raises. And I made a list of them on the side. I thought I was very clever. I figured out how to paste a list into the whiteboard. So I prepared this in advance, and I pasted those questions on the left-hand side before we started our conversation. And then the rest of that, what you're looking at, is just things that either I or someone else added. In general, we tried to talk a bit about conservation and the ethics of it. We didn't deal with the questions so much. We did a little bit, but we had some issues of the people who were in the session. And of course, that was probably more important because that's why they joined. So for example, we talked a fair bit about signage at sites, and we dealt with, I used some examples from Alberta, but we had some other examples where like native voices don't want signage in certain sites. And in one case, a woman was dealing with a very remote site, like 2 to 3 hours hike or drive just to get even close to it. But it's a site that people in boats can get to, and they could get out and camp on the banks of the river, and there are petroglyphs right there. And do we put up signage to say there are petroglyphs and keep your hands off, or do we do nothing? Or do we try and discourage them from even getting there and camping in the first place? These are some of the discussions we talked about. We talked a little bit about responsibility for sites in the terms of that question, sort of, is there such a thing maybe as community ownership, that where the world, where these sites are public trust, and everybody should have more of a say about them. And there was one expression that the world not necessarily has a say in it, but has responsibilities for sites, and that those responsibilities just don't fall to a single interest group, that they are broader than that. We had some talking about natural weathering and deterioration of sites, and that documentation was really key, because natural weathering will, no matter what we do, it's going to happen, and it is happening every single moment of every single day at virtually every rock art site in the world. Whether it's catastrophic or microscopic, it's a fact, unless you've cut it out and put it in a museum. And even then, it's probably eroding microscopically. But there was one person raised the fact that we have, you might have tribal groups, and she was dealing with 12 tribal groups that don't always have the same opinion on what you should be doing, and that this can be a real issue for us if we happen to be, as she was, in positions where you're kind of in an authority management position, and you have to figure out who is it you're supposed to be listening to when they don't all agree. And I pointed out that I've dealt with that, but I did have groups say, well, we don't agree, but if you got this group telling you to do that, we'll respect their opinion. So I have seen that develop as well. So we wrestled with this question about whether or not you tell people rock art is present. I presented one example, and I was asked about, I presented an example where we don't say that it's present. And I was asked, should we maybe perhaps be doing that it might be better if we stress that. And I cited one site in Alberta where there's just a makeshift sign made by local people that said, please don't touch the rock art. It's sacred and your fingerprints do damage, and so on. And that seems to really have worked well. It is last I was there, it is absolutely untouched with graffiti or vandalism, despite being very publicly accessible on a prominent and well-known walking trail. So, man, it's hard to know. You know, you've got sites where they're the most remote places on earth, and you get there and there's John's name is scratched out there. And another one where you've got 100,000 people a year and nobody seems to touch it. And I don't know that I have all the answers, but some of it is, I think, the education, and we mentioned this, the kind of level of education of the visitors that you get. And in some of the very remote sites, it's our feeling that the people who get there are the people who are probably the most responsible and least likely to cause harm and damage, because they're outdoor enthusiasts, they're hikers, they're campers, they're people who like being out in nature, and they see something like this, they find it, and they tend to be the kind of people who are not going to make their name. And I think we've all seen this. The places where you get 1 million people a year, that's not the crowd you're looking at. So we talked about these kind of things. Obviously, we needed more time. We just scratched the surface on a lot of this, but that's my take on it. And if anybody else who was in our group would like to pipe in or add anything else, please do. We've got time to talk about this. I think I'll turn it back over to Linnea.
Okay.
I'll stop.
Tim Dodson, would you like to go? Or you can assign somebody from out of your group if you think they'll do it.
Maybe I should have.
I don't know. I might get in trouble on that one, but I'll start. I'll kind of start off with the big points, and maybe I'll call a person or two. I don't know. So yeah, we had a pretty good discussion. I did not get the whiteboard working. Shame on me, but that's all right. So basically, we really just covered kind of when you're dealing with looking at my notes here. So when you're really dealing with establishing a site management plan, rock art site management plan, and the most important thing to do and the first thing to do is to determine who owns the property, who owns that site in terms of just what is, in terms of the legal aspect, property. Is it under federal control here in the US? Well, then that makes it a little easier, as you are subject to a lot of the federal laws in terms of that, from the National Historic Preservation Act. You have your tribal trust responsibilities for consultation. There's certain things that you have to comply with. You have to deal with your 110 responsibilities. So there's a lot more protection if you know that the site is on federal land. If it's on state land, well, you have to look and see if there's if there's any state laws that can help protect, or what type of responsibilities they have. Something came up with, what if a site crosses both onto state property and federal property? Who takes precedence? Well, it really depends, because it depends on the agency, and the agency and who owns the land is really a big key. What's that agency's mission? What's that agency's goal? What's their responsibility? What are they limited to? So the Forest Service has a different mission than BLM, than everyone else. So, all the federal agencies have to do that. So what's your limitations with dealing with that resource? We also discussed just the different laws versus federal and state and how they may apply. We also discussed about how kind of encouraging state-run lands and state-run sites to develop a rock art mitigation management plan, because that may help them get federal funding to help preserve it. Because if you have to have federal funding, most of these federal agencies providing federal grants have to go through the 106 process, or ensure that that money is going to be used in compliance. So that's another thing that we kind of discussed. Does anyone else in the group want to take it away? I know Matt mentioned something about, highly encouraging the public to help record and identify and protect, rock art sites through monitoring. Do you want to talk about that, Matt, or Alyssa, or Abigail, or Anne-Marie? Would you like to discuss what you guys took away from our discussion?
I can go. This is Abigail. I really enjoyed listening to this and kind of starting to come up with my own questions about how I can potentially implement a management plan. Lake Mead Recreation Area has 1.5 million acres of land. It is home to 18 federally recognized tribal nations. So we have a lot of sites, including rock art sites. And so I really just appreciated hearing how we can involve the tribes. And my question had been, how often do we come back to the tribes in case that their opinions change about how things, how they want to manage their sites? And Tim's response was that, with that management plan, that kind of helps set the stage so that you're not having to, you're involving them in consultation, but everyone is under an agreement, a written agreement, understanding what they're looking to get out of this management plan.
Yeah, and to kind of echo what Abigail said, is kind of using the management plan as a proactive measure of how this site is going to be managed, what is it going to be done, how is it going to be consulted with, whether it's just everyday maintenance or oversight, or whether it is, dealing with a 106 action. If you use the rock art site management plan proactively instead of reactively, it's going to put everyone on the same page to re-engage in consultations, re-engage in site monitoring, and also just set expectations of what is acceptable to the consensus. As everyone has kind of pointed out, not every tribe believes the same thing, and that includes in how to deal with rock art and how to protect it and so on. So that's kind of really what we kind of discussed on that. Thanks for chiming in, Abigail. Appreciate it. Does anyone else want to add anything to it? Anne Marie or Alyssa or Matt?
Sure. This is Anne Marie. I appreciated the discussion about private lands and private landowners and how to work with them on doing these management plans. And then the different types of protection that we could use. There was some discussion about a site being close to a roadway and the idea of using a back gate, which I thought was interesting. I had never thought of that one before, but yeah, just different mitigations. So that's kind of what I learned. And quite honestly, I never thought of doing a management plan for rock art, which seems foolish because I have management plans for other types of sites. So yeah, this is definitely something I'm gonna try to think about and how I can implement it on the sites that I have in my district. Thanks.
Okay, well then, yeah, that kind of sums it up really. It's just kind of, the things you had to go into considering a management plan, not only, where it is, who has the managerial authority on it, what it can be subject to, what it can't be. And the most important thing that I kind of stressed is also, don't put anything in the management plan that you cannot do. Don't do overreach, don't promise something that cannot be fulfilled, and take that in mind when developing it. So you're not just going in there saying, this is going to be how we're going to do it, this is the best thing since sliced bread, and just constantly revisit it and try to get a document that's going to work for you, your site, and specifically just for the conservation or the management of that resource. And that's all I got. Hopefully it was useful.
Thank you. And thanks to your whole group. I'm going to go next because mine's probably the next most closely related. Now here you can see my struggle with both the whiteboard and the English language, but we'll just try and be forgiving here. My group, we talked a little bit about legal aspects and it's, as I said before, the carrot and the stick. The stick is prosecuting people for damaging sites, and the carrot is providing public education and public access. So as far as the legal things, I talked a little bit about the need to provide a value estimate if you are prosecuting a case under ARPA, which is the Archaeological Resource Protection Act. And this is something a lot of archaeologists are not comfortable with, because you actually have to put a monetary value on the site. And there's lots of resources out there about this. Basically, you have several choices. The only choice that you don't have is to refuse to do it. So even though it may be very distasteful to you as a professional archaeologist to try to put a dollar value on the archaeology, you have to do it. You can use insurance value. You can use the value if somebody sold it on the market, sold the piece of rock art. You can use the cost of recovering the data. So for example, if somebody looted a dirt site, and you wanted to go in and salvage what information was left before it eroded away, you can use the figure of the cost it would do to do that excavation and the curation and everything related to it. Or you can use the cost of repairing the damage, which is the one that I think usually gets traction with rock art sites, but you do have to know, you do have to provide that. We talked about if you're working for an agency, to try to establish a good relationship with your law enforcement and to be able to provide them maybe with some examples of successful prosecutions of rock art damage cases. I gave the example of a certain federal agency, a certain unit of a federal agency that was not interested in taking these cases seriously. And then with a lot of pushing, we got them to follow up on one. They got a good out of court settlement. And the next time they didn't hesitate to take the case. And that time they actually got a successful prosecution with restitution for the damage and jail time for the perpetrator. So now it's pretty easy to get them to take it seriously, because those wins are important to federal prosecutors or state attorneys general, whatnot, whatever you're working with. You talked a little bit about treating if there is damage to a rock art site, you kind of have to treat it as a crime scene. You want to collect any evidence or let your law enforcement collect any evidence, keep track of it. And just make sure that you're not making a mistake that's going to lose their ability to prosecute the case. I did mention that ARARA has a rock art site damage reporting program. If you go on our website, arara.wildapricot.org, the first thing you'll see is report damage. It brings up a form on which a person can upload photographs, and they can describe what they're seeing, and they can give us coordinates. And then we will figure out which agency is in charge of that land. If it's public land, we will get it immediately to the archaeologist, and then the archaeologists can pass it on to the law enforcement if it is really anything. Sometimes people see graffiti and they think it's new and it's been there, for decades. So we thought it would be best to run it through the cultural resource expert first, and then they will bring it to the law enforcement. So I think probably most of you are federal agency people and you kind of know this stuff already, but it is important, unfortunately, it is important to prosecute these cases where we can. It is important to get that publicity, to get it in the newspaper or the 6 o'clock news, whatever it might be. People are interested in it, they will pay attention, and then they can't really say, oh, I didn't know any better. So that brings us to educational efforts. I had a little struggle there with the whiteboard. Raising public awareness of the problem of site damage, I think, is important. The public is on our side on this deal. There's a lot of public outrage when a site gets damaged. And I kind of monitor those news articles and so forth. So I have I think a pretty accurate sense of that. So don't be afraid to talk to the media, to call in people who really care about the site, call in Indigenous communities, whatever you need to do to get across to people that it's not okay. And, I noticed I said awareness of the problem of damage. That doesn't mean you're going to tell them where the rock art is, but you can talk about the importance of it and the problem of damage without doing that. We talked about expressing cultural values in educational materials. I think this is quite important. It can be very difficult to translate Indigenous cultural values into non-Indigenous. The two worlds are quite different, but we can find values in common and focus on that, or we can give the Indigenous people, kind of give them the megaphone here. Most people will respect you know, this site is important. It's important to your traditions and so forth. Now I can't see this because I've got a menu on top of it, but I believe it says collaborative efforts. I was only recently introduced to the notion of co-management between, for example, a federally recognized tribe and a federal agency that are going to co-manage a site. I am fascinated by this idea and I would definitely like to learn more about it. So let's see, other people that were in my room, what comments do you have? Just take yourself off mute and jump right in.
I forgot to say when we were talking in our group, when we were talking about collecting evidence and securing the site, that what we always say to, well, to employees or to volunteers or whoever is to only do it safely and not to necessarily confront people who are in the act. And just, you know, of course it's important saving our cultural heritage, but safety first. I forgot to say that before.
Thank you, Gina. That is that is a very important point. Don't try to, you know, just take a picture of their license plate or whatever. Don't go in there. Anybody else care to comment?
Hi, so hopefully you guys can hear me. Sometimes my internet kind of goes in and out, but I didn't mention this during the breakout group, but it's something that we really struggle with from the land management side is having really good record of data before there is anything that happens to the site. So basically having, you know, data to where we can point to the site and be like, oh, this is how the site was a year ago or 2 years ago, and then now here's the damage, and you can use that in the legal battle. And so something that we've been working with in my office is doing regular site monitoring and making sure we have the paperwork with photos and actually having a good site record, because if you don't have a good site record, you know, it's almost impossible that they're going to want to pick up the case, because I think it's like 90 or 95% that they want to be able to prosecute. And if they don't have that number, they're not going to want to actually go forward with your ARPA case. So just something trying to work on from a management side is getting good data of the archaeology sites. And that can be a challenge, but one of the ways that we've worked on that is investing our time with volunteers, because a lot of the public who has a passion for these archaeology sites and they have a little bit more time, you know, working with them to go out and monitor these sites and actually getting good data so that when there's vandalism, that we can actually do something about it. So that's just my 2 cents on that. We're still struggling with doing it, but it is something we're trying to improve.
Thank you. That is such an important site. I nag people about this all the time. And some of my colleagues in academia think that recording graffiti is maybe something they don't want to do. It's so important for exactly the reasons that you just expressed. Anybody else?
Yes,
Shelley.
I just wanted to, thank you. I just wanted to add a little bit to it. Yeah, the hope with what we're doing up here in the Shuswap region is to actually, and I'm just echoing what I think it was Gina or Trinity mentioned, boots on the ground protection. So the 5 communities have a technical working group made up of the title and rights directors. So eventually I'll be looping in with that table. They already have a guardianship program where they monitor along Arrow Lakes, the old archaeological sites. And it's actually some Dutch communities there as well, and their artifacts as well. And they patrol the shoreline. It's a very long, 100 kilometers at least lake. So they do sections at a time. So I want to loop into their process and have it where it's not on a lake, but it's at by boat, but a sidebar program to segue into they already have the staff, the job descriptions, you know, that kind of program already running, but we bring in tourism ambassadors so that we've got boots on the ground, eyes on these pictographs if we do open some up to be shared. The ones that are already in the public realm, they're already getting damaged. So thank you for that. And just again, while I have the opportunity, I wanted to just kind of say this. As I get further along in my research and further along into my master's, where I'm approaching my major project, if I would be able to reach out to some of the experts here to maybe, bounce some ideas off of for my questionnaires, surveys, my research question, and in the hopes that you can assist and help me a little bit with your years of experience and wise sage advice. Also, I will be walking on two legs. That's something, not only am I Limachip, I'm a half breed, so hence the last name Witsky. My dad is Polish and Ukrainian descent. It's full-blood Shukwapan, but we have a concept where we walk on both Western science and traditional ecological knowledge. So we access both. And I would be guided under my elders as well. But I would love to reach out and build, a small network relationship building with some of you folks at some point in the next year. I'm not in a rush to do it because I've got so much going on right now, but if there's some way I can do that through Linnea or just some key contacts, that would be amazing and wonderful. Cook Shem, thank you.
You have my email, and we'd be more than happy to help with this. This was one of the reasons to have the workshop, was just to acquaint everybody with the type of expertise that's available. I want to go back to the first point you were talking about, involving volunteers and boots on the ground. So we got so many federal agency people with us today. I would also say, if you could do a quick training with your anybody that's in the field, your foresters, your biologists, you would be surprised how many rock art sites are discovered by people looking for birds or prairie dogs or whatever. Anytime you can get eyes and ears out there with a little bit, enough knowledge that they can at least take a cell phone picture and email it to you, it's hugely valuable. So I want to move on to Tim Urbaniak's group now, and that's the cool, fun tech stuff. So let's hear what they came up with.
Oh yeah, we're just all full of glitz and glory. Okay, so let's see. Now I ended up using Word for this. Let me share my screen. Okay, so I made some notes in Word here, and Dave, I've sent this to you to your email as a doc file. So we bounced around a little bit. We started out talking about de-stretch, about how effective it is on different kinds of rock surfaces, and I've not found a surface that it doesn't work on yet. Although I will make one quick note that I just thought of. When it comes to photogrammetry, photogrammetry does not like things that are transparent or black or shiny. It doesn't know how to process that. You'll learn it when you start using it. So
Tim, can you back up a second and explain
yes.
de-stretch?
De-stretch is an image enhancement software that processes photos to bring out things that are either very faint or can't be seen with the naked eye. And we also discussed whether or not de-stretch was effective on petroglyphs. It's generally talked about toward pictographs, but it's been my experience that you can end up with good results out of petroglyphs, even though it may not be what it was originally created for. Okay, the RTI, reflective transformance. We talked about how it compares to other texts as far as use, and I commented that it is a little different of the technologies we talk about. RTI has a little bit longer learning curve. All technologies have a learning curve, but RTI was stubborn to get in line. It works the way it wants to work, and that's just that. And also talked a little bit about using RTI with photogrammetry models, and that those technologies can be combined. Again, RTI being kind of a shadow casting technology. It's further than that. Shadow casting and enhancement is a simplification of that. Generally used towards material that is incised or pecked or with a dog. So we talked about combining these technologies. We talked about photogrammetry on both the large and small scale. And look some examples of that. There were questions about what software to use. Metashape is kind of the number one there, I would say. It comes in two versions. It comes in a basic version and a commercial version. I think the basic version is a couple $100. The commercial one, I think, is a couple $1,000. Different reasons to have either one. I do most of my work, the vast majority of my work, with the basic version. And also pointed out that there are multiple places where you can go and get free and open source photogrammetry software if you don't have resources to buy it. Pointed out also with the RTI that if you go to the heritage imaging website, cultural heritage imaging website, there's a lot of information there that's free about RTI and about photogrammetry. On small scale photogrammetry, we talked about accuracy differences between using LiDAR and photogrammetry techniques, particularly tripod mounted LiDAR versus drone mounted photogrammetry, and discussions about accuracy. I'm not sure it's true because these technologies change all the time, but it's been my experience that photogrammetry is potentially more accurate and makes a better representation. And then, of course, through all of these technologies, we chatted a little bit about ethical concerns and that there are ethical concerns. And while acknowledging that ethical concerns of the general public are probably not the same as ethical concerns of tribes and agency personnel and so on. But again, realize that there are certainly ethical concerns with these technologies. Yeah, it was probably too much, but anyone in the group care to comment, please?
I do actually have a question for you, and it's more of a like a layperson question, I suppose. But I work for a state agency in California, and just during the the pandemic lockdown, we got a real surge in park usage. It just got much more busy than it had been before, and that's something that I've noticed with more remote sites that I have visited to go see rock imagery, and it's getting busier in the backcountry as well. And I'm noticing also a lot more people posting pictures. And my question for you was, do you think that it's important to encourage the public to take geotags off of their photos? I mean, I take a lot of photos just for personal records, personal research, and I don't share that with the public, but I'm just noticing a lot of geotags on photos on social media. And from an ethical standpoint, do you think that's pretty important for the public to take that off?
I do think that that should be removed. If it's just an open public forum, of course, that's a technological thing. With some people, they might not know how to take those tags off. So that would be a good thing to create. A quick little sample of, hey, this is how you remove your geotags. As a matter of fact, I would think that's something that ARARA itself might want to post a little thing on how to strip geotags. But
I think that would be great. There's an app that I use and it works fairly well, but I was just wondering if through, I guess from a professional standpoint, I would guess that it's a pretty good idea to safeguard that information.
Yes, I think that's a good thing to advise taking those off. Yeah. Okay, any others?
Yeah, I just wanted to bounce off what Trinity and Shelley were saying about monitoring, because part of, boots on the ground is also eyes in the sky. And as we sort of discussed in Tim's group, drone technology and photogrammetry can be a useful part of that. Down where I work, the Lone Pine Paiute Shoshone are trying to create a drone program, get funding for a drone program to monitor some of their sites. These aren't rock art sites specifically. They deal with that, but it's on military lands. But a lot of the sites, they have a heavy lift for monitoring, around Owens Lake, everywhere. There's a lot of activity around there. And part of that is they still have the manpower to watch all of these areas. And with the drone and photogrammetry, you can really, as Tim sort of pointed out in our discussions, you can look at things like new trails being opened up, places where gates or fences have been broken into. So I think that's sort of an important aspect of it, integrating these sorts of ideas.
That's actually the precise area that I was speaking about, increased usage.
Yeah, the drones, tying two of those together, if you have a photo with a georeference on it and it's a closed travel area, you can plug that GPS location right into the drone and send the drone to go see it anyway, when it's closed to your access. And again, a tribe wouldn't do that, an agency wouldn't do that, but the public will do that. There's a quote from one of the first Men in Black movies that a person is smart, people are stupid.
So true. So we are all learning in many ways lately. We've got just a few more minutes left. So any questions or comments or concerns that you have, just jump right in, take yourself off mute and speak up.
I just wanted to point out, I put Tim's document in the chat if anyone wants to download it.
Thank you.
So what are those of you who are managing lands? A couple of you have mentioned some challenges around increased visitation because of COVID. I'm curious, do you think that increased level is going to keep going now, or is it going to drop off again if we ever get rid of COVID? Well, most people are pretending we have gotten rid of it. Or do now people know, I don't know, did it change the whole perspective on public lands? I don't know.
I can say that in the region of the world I live in, Linnea, there's been a real spike in the use of public lands since COVID came in, and partly it was people were not going to work, and many things were closed, so they looked for something they could do outside, and it was the national parks had explosion in visitation, not in overnight stays and restaurants and hotels and stuff, but in just walking. The walking trails became like Times Square. I mean, you were afraid to walk a trail because they were packed with people, usually not wearing masks because you're outside and you kind of felt like I don't have to wear a mask when I'm outside. So we had a huge spike in the use of public lands. I'm sure that will die down a bit with the opening up of so many other options for people to do. But my experience in general, and I think this is true in the United States, has been that visitation of things like historical resources of whatever kind has only ever gone up. To my knowledge, it's never gone down. And places like Writing on Stone, now it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Well, as you know, there are people in the world who just travel to see UNESCO sites, and we will get increasing visitation now because of that designation. But even if we hadn't gotten it, we would get increasing visitation just because the population is going up, and I think there's been a tendency in the world for people to get out and see things that are out there for them to see. There was a couple hundred years ago, people lived in one little village their whole life and never went anywhere, and those days are over. And so we're going to see increasing visitation. And one of the questions that got raised in my session was some of these sites that are managed by the government or let's say a regulatory agency of some kind. And I gave one example, it's called the Okotoks Erratic. It's a very heavily vandalized site and repeatedly vandalized. And yet it's run by the government for the public. It's got a parking lot, it's got hiking trails, it's got interpretive signage, bathrooms, and there are these two monstrous rocks within about 150 meters of a major road. And so it's a perfect canvas for spray bombing, especially around graduation time. And there we have the invited public parking and walking up to this kind of massacre of a heritage site. And what are we supposed to do about that? Or do we leave it because it's not appropriate to touch it and take things off, which is kind of sending a message that we're hopelessly incompetent at managing this and we shouldn't be doing it? Or do we take things off and run the risk of damaging rock art that's on the site, or getting First Nations perhaps angry, although we've had meetings at the site and they have generally supported the idea of removing graffiti. In fact, I would say almost universally supported it, because in those cases, it's so in your face, it's so egregious. Swear words, great big, letters that are 2 or 3 feet high, with 4-letter words and people's names and so on. But it raises the issue, when you are the owner and the manager of that, is there a responsibility to perhaps deal with situations that are extreme like that, where the public is seeing the extent of defacement? And that was, it's a point I think we can go on debating for a long time.
It sounds like everybody's in agreement that the visitation is going to stay high, and we're going to have to figure out how to deal with that. I think the positive side of this is that most of those people came there because they thought it was interesting. They thought it was historical. They wanted to experience something different. And so if you're looking at it from a lobbying point of view, we've got this big lot of people enjoying visiting these places, and hopefully they will support funding and legislation and that type of thing to protect the sites. I'm not really 100% sure how to capitalize on that attitude, but I guess maybe it's a good one to almost end on, that at least we do have people who appreciate it. Now Trinity is weighing in about public education, which is definitely, it can't hurt, right? So I think it can be very effective depending on how it's done. And so a lot of the agencies have really good educational materials that are, if it's produced by a federal agency, you and I paid for it and it is in the public domain, and we can use it. So I guess that's the high note, is that we can know that we've got most of the people on our side, and the low note is people are just going to love these places until they're worn away. So we just have a few more minutes, and what other topics are on anybody's mind at this point? Abigail?
A little bit. And I was just curious, we use the site stewardship program in our state to help monitor some of those sites that everyone knows about, but we don't necessarily have time to monitor on a regular basis. I was just kind of curious if anyone else uses their state site stewardship program as a way to get more, volunteers out there helping monitor your sites.
I believe that New Mexico has a program. Margaret Barrier has left us. She would know about it. Christina Hill says they have that in Arkansas. I think they can be very effective with, you got to do a little bit of training, but not so much. So those of you who are weighing in, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Arkansas, did I get everybody? Arizona.
Montana uses
and
site
Montana,
stewards as well.
maybe we should put these stewardship programs all together in one place where everybody can look at them and see what's effective and try and develop local programs as well. I know,
I know-
everybody's busy.
Project Archaeology, I think, led that effort in Montana. I don't know if Project Archaeology is just regional or if it's nationwide, but that's who headed it up here.
I'll look into that.
Can the ARARA website serve that purpose?
I think it could, yeah. Do you think, does anybody think it would be helpful to have some examples of management plans available for you to look at?
Yeah.
Okay, so we could look at that as well.
And I did post that website, Linnea, for the UNESCO the management plan for Writing in Stone is available through the UNESCO World Heritage.
Good. And I've wanted to put together, and you know, here I need volunteers to do some of this stuff. Just a list of court cases around rock art site damage, because I do think if your local law enforcement and prosecutor can see that this can be done successfully, they're going to be more interested in taking the case and taking it seriously. So maybe one day we'll get all this stuff together online. Okay, well, before we break up here, again, I would encourage any of you, if you have any feedback at all on today's workshop, you can find a contact form on the ARARA website, arara.wildapricot.org, or you can just email me directly, linnea.sundstrom@gmail.com, or email, if you can find our emails, anybody else that was speaking today. We really would very much like to hear back from you, and we will decide whether to offer this program again, but if we do, we will tweak it up according to your comments. Thank you so much for participating. I'm just so jazzed to see all these people here, and great comments, and I hope everybody learned something.
I just wanted to quickly say that I could not get funding to bring my elders to this. We originally planned to go when it was going to be in person in Montana. This is something I'm going to look forward to for next year, and I'll bring hopefully a busload of elders with me and learn. And it doesn't have to be the same, whatever you guys would like to teach this time, but I really appreciate the management, site management workshop part of this and all the learning. So Cook's Jam, thank you.
Great.
Great,
Thank you.
Shelley.
Thank you for all your participation. It was very helpful.
Thank you for organizing this, Linnea.
Yeah, thank you, Linnea.
Well, thank you, speakers, and our one that had to slip away. You know, I'm thinking all the people that know stuff, oh my gosh, we could bring in another 10 people easily.